Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for clicking on this video. My name is Rich Allen, and I am a big fan of rotating space habitats that are a conceptual design for how humanity could just continue to expand into space infinitely. And I think that's an exciting future. So I wanted to present you with a history of the artwork for where these designs came from. So if you're new to this, or even if you've been around the artwork for a while, I think this will be a pretty cool video for you. And or if you have no idea who this guy is behind me, then you came to the right place. Just sit back, grab a snack, and let's talk about it. Okay, so this is Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. And in 1903, he published Exploration of Outer Space, his book that mentioned and used rotating space habitats for the very first time ever being published. Now this stamp behind me, that illustration on it was created at a later time, and so it might not have been his vision, but he was the first to mention. And then Herman Potocnik, later on in 1928, it's a quarter of a century later, wrote The Problem of Space Travel with the Rocket Motor. And then he also mentioned rotating space habitats. Here again is another example of a different illustrator's version of his vision. But according to Wikipedia, he did mention rotating space habitats in his book. But then around the same time period, 1929, James Desmond Bernal published The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. And that's where he initially introduced his Bernal sphere, which was basically a sphere that rotates. But of course, it wastes a lot of the space on the inside of the space habitat because it doesn't provide an even amount of pseudogravity. So George O. Smith published Venus Equilateral in 1942. If I said I knew a lot about that, I'd be lying, but it was mentioned in Wikipedia as one of the earliest mentions of a space habitat in literature. So by artwork, I mean literature and illustrated artwork. And then in the 1950s, there was two different comic books, Strange Adventures and Mysteries in Space. And they ran stories every month, but some of those stories would occasionally feature rotating space habitats. So that's another mention. So here's the other one, Mystery in Space. Now these are just two example covers. But if you look deeper into those two comic books, you'll find more mentions. You should be able to find more mentions of rotating space colonies.
The entire wheel will slowly rotate at 3 revolutions per minute. The resulting centrifugal force will produce an artificial gravity for the men in the rim. Notice that the floors are placed so that the men stand with their heads toward the hub. The wheel is divided into 9 sections. The first section is headquarters and communications. The next section will be for Earth weather observation and prediction. Military reconnaissance experts, aided by powerful optical and radar telescopes, will observe.
So this is Wernher von Braun. If you haven't seen or heard of Wernher von Braun before, he's the main engineer behind the Apollo space program. And this video was created in collaboration with Disney, like 17 years before Apollo 11. So Wernher von Braun's one of the most important figures in the history of space exploration, and he was discussing rotating space habitats many years ago.
Prefabricated and tested on the ground. After dismantling, it will be transported in pieces up to the orbit.
And Daryl C. Romick in the mid 50s, he worked for Goodyear Corporation. I'm not sure how he got funding to work on space habitats and space designs, but it's the same Goodyear company that creates tires. He was a very futuristic designer, as you can see with this space rocket, but he also featured rotating space colonies.
Давно ли мы провожали первых космонавтов в полет сюда, на эту круговую орбиту, тогда еще не обжитую? А сейчас отсюда человек делает следующий шаг. Летит на Луну.
Here we go. No special effects here. I mean, this is practical effects.
Фантазия ученых и художников всегда идет впереди действительности. Первые люди еще только летят на Луну.
That's great. And so then in the early 1960s, some NASA scientists published this design of a rotating space colony that would be launched into outer space as one single module and then expanded. And then here's a more recent illustration of that design. That's pretty amazing. I wish we would design like a more modern version that would be one single launch. That would be so cool. So here's the eponymous 2001 A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. Notice here in this space shuttle that they're in, it's spinning the same rate that the wheel is spinning, that the habitat's spinning. So here it is. And Kubrick had to envision all of this in his mind. He couldn't incrementally develop in a 3D computer environment. He had to envision every detail, how the camera's moving through the ring. I mean, this is classic. I like to pay attention to every frame of every video that's in this video, because it's a lot of work and not a lot of support from the public on these kind of designs up until now. This actually is pretty interesting. I mean, this is separate modules connected together, and it looks like it would be
Earth 2.
It looks like it would be realistic.
The last hurrah of a dying planet.
In a way. I mean, not
Noah's Ark.
fully developed, but I mean, just as a basic concept. Arthur C. Clarke wrote Rendezvous with Rama. I've read that book. It's fantastic. I really recommend it. So this alien space habitat comes flying through the solar system, and humans manage to go out and fly to it, and they actually manage to get access to it, but there's nobody living on it. And it's this ancient space colony. It's pretty cool. Shortly after that, Gerard K. O'Neill came out. This is, of course, after the Apollo program. He wrote The High Frontier. He taught classes at Stanford. He came up with the O'Neill cylinder and the Stanford torus. If you're not familiar with these designs, just keep watching. You're going to learn all about it right now.
Constructed almost entirely from ore mined on the moon, the Taurus colony would become home for 10,000 people. They would live, work, and be protected within a vast wheel more than a mile in diameter. The Earth-like environment would even simulate our gravity as the wheel revolves once each minute.
The other materials like food and water are maintained locally within the colony. The initial supplies are brought up from Earth, and then eventually the colony becomes self-sustaining. We got the agricultural system designed so that we could actually feed 10,000 people in an area of just a little over 100 acres. This is very, very, very efficient. We did it by utilizing the sunlight that's available all the time in space, by optimizing the temperatures, by not having storms or things like that that damage crops. And we increased the carbon dioxide levels a little bit so the plants grow a little faster. By playing all these tricks, we were able to generate this fairly efficient farm in our design.
From dairy farms to manufacturing, the concept of living and working in space is a possibility with existing technology. That new space home, located 250,000 miles from Earth, would even have a far-out address.
There are places in space between the Earth and the Moon called the libration points.
Okay, and T.A. Heppenheimer wrote Colonies in Space in the later 70s. I'd be lying if I knew the details of that story, but if you look up space colonies on Google, you're going to see this picture a lot. A beautiful picture. It still amazes me that they didn't have any 3D computers to try to simulate, you know, like incrementally develop this design. Somebody had to like draw it, all the details. That's a lot of talent. Space Colonies by Stuart Brand. Same time period. A lot of these books in the 70s and 80s I haven't read, but I want to include them. I want to mention them as something that existed and it was part of the history and progression of space colony artwork.